From the park boundary, we could see 3 tall, slender, disgusting figures slowly making their way towards us. They were flanking us in a triangle pattern. 3 wendigos made their presence known. All 3 were of different sizes. The one on my left was a shorter one. I'm 6'3", and this one looked to be around my height. Some white fur covered most of its body, along with a massive set of horns. The one to our right was about the size of the wendigo I encountered just weeks before. It was 7 to 8 feet tall and brown in color, but the one standing the furthest away was the scariest of all. Jet black fur covered its body, and it had snow-white horns. This one was maybe just a foot or so shorter than Big Grim, so 10 feet tall or so, I'm guessing. I assumed this was the King Wendigo. While I was doing all my internet research on the creature, one article mentioned that every clan of Wendigo had an alpha, and this was it. Big Grim took a step forward and bellowed the loudest roar I'd ever heard. The Wendigo slowly walked towards us, all 3 snickering and flicking their snake-like tongues out. Drool leaked out of the corner of their mouths as they locked their gaze on us. Big Grim looked from left to right, preparing himself for possibly his last stand. The giant bear turned his massive head back towards Rob and me, and he repeatedly pointed his snout towards the 4-wheeler. Although he didn't speak, I understood fully what the bear was trying to tell us. Leave while you still can. I'll hold them off. Without thinking, I took a few steps towards the ATV, but Rob was planted in the same spot. The Wendigos roared and screamed towards us, and I yelled as loud as I possibly could. Rob, let's get the fuck out of here. Rob jerked his head around towards me with tears rolling down his face. I'm not leaving him. I stood there, trembling in shock. The screams from the Wendigo and the bellowing roars from Big Grim nearly made me cover my ears. Fuck, I whispered to myself. I took one last second to say a small prayer before walking up beside Rob, shoulder to shoulder, preparing for a bloody showdown. The King Wendigo sat down on a massive fallen log on top of the ridge before raising his right arm, pointing his long, nasty, bony hand towards us and shouting in a deep tone. "Kill them," the smallest Wendigo hissed. And Big Grim jerked his head around to the left and roared angrily, hot saliva splattering the trees and leaves around him. Big Grim took off on all 4s towards the beast. The Wendigo took a wide swipe at Big Grim's head, but the bear anticipated it, halting his run and causing the beast's hand to connect with a nearby branch. Big Grim stood on his hind legs, roaring into the sky, before swiping his massive paw across the Wendigo's face, knocking it backwards onto the ground. The bear opened its jaws unbelievably wide and bit down with its long, sharp teeth into the creature's leg, shaking his head around violently, attempting to remove the creature's limb. Just then, I saw a blur of brown fur and antlers fly by me, and the medium-sized Wendigo pounced onto Big Grim's back, scratching and clawing at the bear's head. Big Grim released his hold on the smaller one and began swatting his massive paws in every direction, attempting to knock the creature off him, but the Wendigo was fast and agile. Dodging each of the bear's blows, the creature bit down on the tender spot of the bear's neck, causing him to wince and roar loudly in anguish. Rob and I were snapped out of our trance by the sight and sound of our friend in intense pain. I ran over to the creatures and aimed my .44 directly at the Wendigo's head, but every time I attempted to pull the trigger, the movement of the 2 animals caused me to pause. I sure as hell didn't want to accidentally shoot Big Grim. Just then, a loud gunshot rang out, nearly making my eardrum rupture. The Wendigo howled in pain and fell backwards onto the ground. I turned to see Rob standing there, smoke trickling out of the end of his .38. Rob looked like an old gunfighter making his final stand in the Old West. By this point, the smaller Wendigo had recovered and was attempting to claw and bite at Big Grim. The creature hissed and dove at the bear's legs, attempting to trip him and get the upper hand. That plan proved futile, as Big Grim's long claws dug into the thin layer of skin on the creature's back, and the Wendigo was hoisted up in the air like a stuffed teddy bear in an arcade claw machine. Big Grim pulled the creature in close to him and roared into its ugly, deformed deer skull before swiftly biting down on the creature's neck, and with one jerk of his head, he ripped the Wendigo's head from its body, causing black blood to spray in every direction. Big Grim dropped the creature's head and body on the ground before proceeding to swipe and claw at it, ripping it into dozens of pieces, leaves and foliage flying around like a tornado. Rob and I were unloading round after round into the brown Wendigo, and although black blood was squirting out of the hideous creature's body, it just kept coming. Lowering my gun, I proceeded to reload it, but my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't get a grip on the ammunition in my pocket. Just then, I heard Rob yell out in pain. He was also trying to reload, but unfortunately for us, we both ran out at the same time. The Wendigo charged him, and bull rushed him into the massive oak I mentioned earlier. Rob's eyes were fluttering, and blood was trickling out of his nose as he struggled to catch his breath. Fueled by anger and fury, I ran towards the beast and clubbed my pistol hard against the creature's temple. The Wendigo recoiled and shook its head around violently, trying to regain focus. I repeatedly smashed the cold metal of my gun against the creature's deer skull over and over, not realizing I should be taking this opportunity to reload. After several blows to the head, the creature bit down on my forearm and shoved me off of it, making me scream in pain as I rolled across the ground, leaves and dirt clinging to the blood dripping from my arm. My head was spinning from the creature's blow, and my hand lost its grip on my gun, and it flew across the forest floor out of sight. Big Grim froze and jerked his head around to see Rob and I lying on the ground, groaning in pain. The bear's blood-red eyes were burning in hatred towards the creature who was attempting to kill us. The giant bear spit the Wendigo's severed head out onto the forest floor, and with a deafening roar, charged the brown creature. The Wendigo turned around in an attempt to stop Big Grim's assault, but the bear tackled it, and I heard the two creatures' bodies collide hard with a sickening crunch. The bear and the Wendigo thrashed and rolled across the ground, both beasts biting and clawing at each other. The Wendigo swiped its bony hand across the bear's hide, ripping fur and tissue away each time. The bear retaliated by locking his jaws down hard on the beast's arm. The Wendigo screamed and punched Big Grim with its free arm, attempting to stop his assault. My eyes fluttered a few times as I regained focus. I saw Rob breathing heavily on the ground, and I could tell he was badly injured. I knew this was a stupid idea to come here. I thought I was doing the right thing by bringing Rob here to find peace and closure, but seemingly all I did was bring death on us both. My arm was leaking massive amounts of blood by this point, but I found the courage to army crawl across the ground and retrieve my pistol, half buried in leaves and foliage. I pulled 3 bullets out of my jacket pocket and loaded them into the chamber. I couldn't tell who was winning the fight because both the Wendigo and Big Grim had multiple deep wounds squirting blood across the forest. My vision fading in and out made it difficult to accurately aim my weapon, but Big Grim gave me a perfect opportunity for a shot by swiping his massive paw down onto the Wendigo's back and knocking it a few feet away from him. I fired all the shots in rapid succession directly into the creature's neck and chest area. Although I knew from experience that bullet wounds did little to harm these things, it seemed, along with its other injuries, that my shots slowed the creature down significantly. Big Grim looked out on his feet, his legs looking like jello. Rob, Still unconscious, sitting up against the oak tree, my heart sank as I couldn't tell if he was still breathing or not. The Wendigo was still struggling and attempting to stand. Big Grim was shakily trying to make his way towards the badly injured creature. I gritted my teeth and told myself, "Get your fucking ass up and keep fighting." For Rob, for Big Grim, I got to my feet and limped over to the ATV, picking up the flamethrower and turning the valve on. I aimed the blowtorch towards the Wendigo, and just before I lit it, the Wendigo swiped its arm at me, just missing its mark. The flamethrower hissed, and a giant stream of fire shot from the end of the torch directly into the disgusting creature's face. Fire enveloped the creature, causing it to scream so loud that I swore it shook the remaining dead leaves that were clinging desperately to the trees off onto the ground. The creature rolled and thrashed on the forest floor, fire burning every inch of rotten flesh from its body. It looked up at me with burning hatred as fire shot out from the creature's black eye sockets before its movement ceased. I collapsed onto the ground, cold sweat covering my aching body as I turned towards Big Grim, who stood behind me, snarling and salivating, staring down at the dead creature. I noticed that all the rolling around I'd done on the ground had actually been to my advantage. The dirt had packed my wounded arm and slowed the bleeding significantly. I smiled and looked over my shoulder at the monstrous bear and said, "Well, look at that big fella. I used a page out of your book." Big Grim grunted softly before turning around and locking eyes with the King Wendigo. The massive 10-foot creature stood smiling at us, slowly clapping its hands before laughing deeply and speaking.
"Maybe I underestimated you three. You've dispatched my entire army. But make no mistake, you can't defeat me, and I will make sure none of you make it out of this forest alive."
Big Grim rose onto 2 feet and roared at the hulking monstrosity. The King Wendigo opened its jaws, revealing rows upon rows of jagged and rotting teeth, and screamed back at the bear. Big Grim lunged forwards towards the Wendigo, pushing it backwards with its massive paws. The Wendigo retaliating by kicking the bear hard in the stomach with its massive legs and feet. Big Grim recovered and swiped its paw hard across the creature's lower body, making it scream loudly. Grim attempted to stomp on the Wendigo's chest, but the Wendigo rolled out of the way and jumped onto Big Grim's back. This time, the bear struggled to keep his balance, because this Wendigo was far heavier than the previous ones. The Wendigo wrapped its long arm around the bear's throat and jerked the bear sideways, making him lose his balance. Big Grim fell hard onto his side, and the King Wendigo wasted little time biting his throat, attempting to end the bear's life. Groans and roars escaped Big Grim's throat, as the Wendigo had ripped enough meat and tissue off to expose bone. The bear attempted to regain his strength, but this Wendigo was far more powerful than the others. It was relentless. He attempted to regain his strength, but this Wendigo was far more powerful than the others. His legs gave out, and the bear crumbled onto the ground. With the little strength I had left, I grabbed the flamethrower and staggered over to the 2 creatures. The Wendigo's head jerked around as it heard the whoosh from the torch, the creature's back engulfed in flames, but to my horror, it continued its assault on the bear. A jolt of fear shot up my spine as I realized it didn't care if it died, as long as Big Grim went with him. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath before running full speed and tackling the Wendigo with all my might. The Wendigo released its hold on Big Grim, and we went flying across the forest floor. At this point, the creature's entire body was smoldering, and all of its fur had burnt off. The creature looked even scarier now, just a deer skull with bloody red tissue up and down its body. It stared me down before swiping its clawed hand across my face. Its nails left 4 deep cuts across my cheek, and I flew across the ground. My eyes fluttered open, noticing that, in my panicked state, I hadn't turned the flamethrower off. It ran out of propane, but not before starting a small forest fire. A ring of fire had circled around the Wendigo, and I knew that this was it. Surprisingly, I was at peace. I didn't die a coward. I fought to the end, and I fought for Rob and for Big Grim. As I was about to close my eyes one last time, I saw a black figure come rushing past me. Big Grim had found his second wind and was barreling down on the burning creature. The Wendigo tried to dodge him, but Big Grim stood on his hind legs and raised his massive paw over his head. And as he was falling forward, he swiped it hard across the Wendigo's neck and face. The 2 creatures collided, and the aftermath truly showed me just how powerful the bear was. He literally beheaded this beast with one blow. The Wendigo laid on its back, still burning, but with nothing but its windpipe holding its head on. Its head turned slightly to look at me before uttering one final statement in a ghostly and raspy tone.
You and your pet may have ended our reign in this forest, but there is a creature here that even we are afraid of. Now that we are gone, he will surely come for you, and when he does, there's nothing he can do to save you.
The creature's words were cut off as the fire enveloped what was left of its body. Snow began falling in rapid white sheets, and to my surprise, had began accumulating, and the fire had burnt out at the snow's icy touch. Big Grim had made his final stand, because after beheading the Wendigo, the bear had fallen forward and collapsed onto the ground, unmoving and possibly not breathing. I tried to stand but physically couldn't. My eyes closed, and I drifted off into a deep, peaceful sleep. I awoke sometime later to a pitch-black forest. The forest felt peaceful for the very first time. I tried to get my sense of direction, and I saw the 4-wheeler a few yards away. I crawled to it and used its tire to lift myself up to a standing position. I fumbled through my pack and retrieved my flashlight, flicking it on and trying to find Rob. Rob hadn't moved. I hastily limped over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I shook him lightly, and tears began to form in my eyes. I whispered, "I'm sorry," as my hot tears melted the snow beneath my boots. Rob grunted, and my heart skipped a beat. His eyes fluttered open, and I heard him weakly say, "For what, son? You and Big Grim just kicked some Wendigo ass." I wrapped my arms around the old man's neck, and I collapsed beside him. Rob was dazed and weak, but other than some small injuries, he was going to make it. He looked around and asked, "Where is he? Please, tell me he didn't die." I sighed and told Rob I thought Big Grim was gone. Rob shook his head and began to sob. "Damn it," he said. "I came here to thank him, and all I did was cause him to die. For me, for you." I patted the old man's shoulder again and told him, "He went out like a hero should." Just then, the beam of my flashlight finally landed on the massive bear's body. He was lying right where I last saw him. I stood up and extended my hand out to Rob, helping him to his feet. "Come on, let's say goodbye." Rob and I knelt down beside the massive bear, and I couldn't help but think what a beautiful and amazing creature Big Grim was. His body was missing fur and tissue in so many places, it made my stomach sick. Rob put his hand out, and I knew this is what he always wanted. To touch him, to lay his hand on the beast that saved his life all those years ago. Rob's hand patted the bear's head, and Rob affectionately stroked the bear's fur. He smiled and said, "Thank you my friend. I'll never forget you." Rob and I stood and turned to walk away before a bone-chilling growl echoed across the ground. We turned to see Big Grim looking at us, steam blowing out of his nostrils, his blood-red eyes gazing at us before standing up and gingerly walking towards us. Rob gasped and said, "God, you're still alive." Big Grim looked at us, and somehow, even though he looked scarier than ever, I could see compassion in his eyes. He cared for us in some way. He walked closer and looked into our eyes. Rob wearily said, as his voice broke, "Thank you, big fella." I said the same, and the bear nodded his head, the moonlight reflecting off his black and silver fur. Rob and I watched in awe as Big Grim slowly walked back toward the park boundary. He stopped just before he got to our old tree stand. He rose onto 2 feet, turning just his head around to look at us one last time before looking skyward and bellowing a loud roar into the sky before walking out of sight. It was over. Somehow, someway, we had all made it out of this ordeal alive. All of us were battered and bloody, bruised, but alive. Rob and I drove down, and after some effort, due to our injuries, got the 4-wheeler loaded. I drove us home due to Rob being worse off than me. Rob and I went to the hospital the next day and were treated for some broken bones, bad cuts, and scrapes. We told the doctors that a pack of coyotes had attacked us, and no one questioned it. Rob and I have talked about what happened that day a lot, and we both still can't believe what transpired. I know most of you will find our story hard to believe, and I don't blame you. Now that the Wendigos have been defeated, I thought my life would go back to normal, and my dreams would be free of the nightmares that lurk in the orchard. But that creature's words have stuck with me. What else is in that forest? There's still a threat there, and how can it be worse than those monstrosities? I'm not sure what to think, but all I know is that Big Grim is a hero. He fought for us, almost died for us, and asked nothing in return. I will make sure that the orchard stays in our control so that Big Grim can live out his days in peace and safety. I owe him that much. I pray every single night that he's okay. He was as close to death this time as I've ever seen him, and I'm still not sure how he made it. He's one tough son of a bitch. I do know that. Rob called me last night and asked what we should do about whatever is still lurking in the orchard. I didn't really know what to say. Most of you would advise me to never go in those woods again, but something is calling me and Rob back. Rob and I are planning to return to check on Big Grim and possibly prepare to challenge whatever entity remains in that forest after we are healed up. I told Rob that I don't think Big Grim can go through another battle like that again. At least not for a long time until he is healed. But before Rob hung up the phone, he uttered one last thing to me. "Son, the arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control and not the other way around. Let them fight." I was silent for a moment before replying. Yes, but this time we are joining the fight. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more terrifying stories.